bring in Tanya Plibersek. She's the Shadow Minister for Women and Education. Thanks for your time. It looks like there will be a Royal Commission from what you can see from some coalition MPs there that really are calling for one. The Prime Minister wants a separate standalone commissioner, which he says has the ongoing powers of a Royal Commission, but it looks like the community, the veterans community is very strong on this.
Yeah, and I don't understand why the Prime Minister is being stubborn on this. If the families and loved ones of veterans who have suicided want a Royal Commission, then surely after all those veterans gave up for our nation, all their families have suffered, that's what they should get.
Okay, let's move on because there's some other stories to talk about. One of them is the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. You're the Shadow Minister for Women.
Yep.
And your concern is that some businesses have been getting government contracts despite not reporting on things like sexual harassment or women's pay. That companies that are not meeting the mark essentially are still getting government contracts.
Exactly. And around 2012, we set up a system where companies would report on their gender pay gap and measures to make sure women were safe from sexual harassment at work. And the idea was that companies who complied and reported, so bigger companies of a certain size, as long as they complied, they would be eligible for government contracts. But if they didn't comply, if they refused to report on their gender pay gap and measures to keep women safe at work, then they wouldn't be eligible for government contracts. The number of non-compliant companies when Labor left office was 6. That number has increased 17-fold. There's 104 companies now. I mean, it is a sign, I think, that the government is simply not imposing their only sanction on those companies, which is not to hand out government contracts and grants. So more than $80 million in contracts and grants has gone to these non-compliant companies. So in the last year we've got figures for.
Is that 104 companies, are they all getting government business?
Yeah. I would have to check whether they're all getting it, but more than $80 million worth of contracts and grants have gone to non-compliant companies.
So if we're talking about a change in culture, that's obviously something in the private sector, as we're looking in this parliament into a cultural issue, that's something that you want to see amended. How can it be fixed?
Well, the government has to stop giving contracts and grants to companies that refuse to comply with their legal obligation to report on sexual harassment and gender pay gap initiatives in the workplace.
But how do you do that? Is it the agency? Is it the agency that says,
government
okay,
departments?
Yeah.
There's a list of non-compliant companies. You just need to, when you're about to award a grant or a contract, or in the process of making a decision about a grant or a contract, you check the list of non-compliant companies, and if they're on that list, then they don't get the money.
Another report today on the 10 network coming up by Peter Van Onselen, and it involves misogynistic and sexual acts in female MPs' offices. It is disgraceful and bizarre, some of the images involved here. It's the latest in a very odd and concerning trend of stories that we've seen, and this is involving Liberal staffers, according to this report this evening. What's your reaction?
Well, I haven't seen the details yet, but from what I heard from Andrew just a moment ago and what you're telling me, it just sounds like I've got no words. I don't understand why people come to work on the taxpayers' dime and do this stuff. Like, I just don't get what they think is okay about behaving this way in our workplace, in my workplace, in your workplace. And what really troubles me about it is if we keep dealing with this as just a political problem and to get through in the short term, the next few days, we'll hang on, we'll manage it, manage the media of it, manage the politics of it. We are so missing the point here that there is something broken at the heart of a workplace culture that allows this sort of behaviour. And what does it say to all the other women in Australia, the first-year medical intern, the young cadet on a first naval posting, the bus driver, the factory worker, the nurse, the teacher, the aged care worker, the shop assistant, the person working in hospitality, if the Parliament doesn't take it seriously, if this is not a safe workplace for women, how can we say that any workplace is safe for women, and that we are fully committed to making those workplaces safe?
On the report today that Labor's been targeting the Prime Minister on, he says that his secretary, the Secretary of the Department, had advice from the Federal Police Commissioner, and in fact the Commissioner, Reece Kershaw, issued a statement confirming that he gave that advice to Mr Gations, the Secretary of the Prime Minister's Department, on the 9th of March, that it would be advisable to hold off his review of what staff knew what and when. That's pretty clear-cut, isn't it, in terms of a defence for why this was paused, this review into what staff knew what and when in relation to the Brittany Higgins allegations?
Well, why was the Prime Minister pretending all of last week that this report was ongoing, that this inquiry was ongoing? Why was he pretending all week that Brittany Higgins would get an answer to this series of questions she has about who knew what when? Why has the Prime Minister all week been refusing to even ask whether his media unit have been briefing against Brittany Higgins' loved ones? Why has the Prime Minister refused to read the material that had the allegations against his Attorney General, Christian Porter? This looks so much like don't ask, don't tell, Prime Minister with his head in the sand. And the problem with this is not just that what has happened to Brittany Higgins is unacceptable and we need transparency and answers. The problem's not just that the allegations against the Attorney General need transparency, need answers. The problem with this is it has the effect of stopping other victims of sexual assault and sexual harassment coming forward, because they think if this happens to these women in this circumstance in our Parliament, how do I ever have a chance of being heard? And we know that this is already a problem. We know that about 1 in 10 sexual assaults are reported, and of the 1 in 10 reported, you get about a 3% conviction rate, less than 3%. So anything that makes it, sends a message to victims of sexual assault that they're not likely to be believed, that their matter won't be properly investigated, is exactly the wrong thing to be doing, not just in Parliament, but everywhere, right around Australia.
And Labor's been calling for an investigation into the Attorney General and those allegations, but as the Deputy Leader, when Bill Shorten was Leader, you know there were allegations, historical allegations against him. What, for our viewers, explain what's the difference between one, where the case was closed for Bill Shorten, and Mr Porter, where again the case was closed for different circumstances, but essentially historical allegations?
Well, the different circumstances were that in Bill's case, the police investigated for 10 months and spoke to him on a number of occasions. He made himself available to them whenever they needed to speak to him. They spoke to the complainant in the matter, I believe, on a number of occasions. They also spoke to other people who are attending the same function, as far as I know. And in the case around the Attorney General, the police have no complainant to speak to, that they've given up.
She requested that they shut it, that she was not going to pursue it before she sadly took her own life.
Yeah, and there's a lot of reasons that I'm not going to comment on in detail. I just have to say that in general, the fact that someone has not pursued legal action is not, it's not unusual. Like I say, only 1 in 10, an estimated 1 in 10
totally.
sexual assaults are
we need
even
to encourage
in the first place.
No, absolutely, I get that, but I think there's the difference between people asking what's the difference between one and the other. They're both historical rape allegations, and yet Labor's going so hard on one and
Kieran,
accepting the justice on the other.
I'd say this, an independent arm's length inquiry into the Attorney General may well find that he has no case to answer, but it would not be unusual. The former Solicitor General said that we could ask the current Solicitor General. Don't forget, Prime Minister John Howard had the inquiry into the Governor General, Mr Hollingworth, at the time. I mean, these things, there are precedents where you can fairly, at arm's length and independently investigate very serious allegations.
Tanya Plibersek, appreciate your time.
Thank you.